The Zephyrian Empire had always prided itself on being magnificently generous to lesser species. After all, when you possessed antimatter cannons that could crack moons and neural disruptors that could scramble thoughts from 3-star systems away, sharing a few outdated trinkets with the galactic newcomers seemed like the pinnacle of charitable behavior. It was, the Empire's philosophers agreed, the burden of the enlightened to guide the primitive. Commander Vextal adjusted his ceremonial battle silk as he reviewed the integration protocols for the latest addition to civilized space. Humans. The very name sounded clumsy on his 4-part tongue. These bipedal mammals had somehow stumbled into faster-than-light travel using what appeared to be controlled explosions and sheer stubbornness. Their first diplomatic message had been charmingly primitive. "Hello, we come in peace. Please don't vaporize us." How refreshingly honest, compared to the usual flowery declarations of eternal friendship that most species opened with. The integration ceremony was scheduled for the third moon of Kepler 442b, a suitably neutral location that wouldn't overwhelm the humans with the Empire's more impressive architectural achievements. Vextal had personally overseen the selection of appropriate gifts for humanity's military forces. The weapons cache included chemical propellant firearms, crude explosive devices, and what the humans quaintly called ballistic missiles, technology that the Empire had abandoned roughly 3,000 years ago, but perfect for a species that still used fire to cook their food. "Sir," his aide, Lieutenant Kixner, approached, with the characteristic shuffle glide that indicated bureaucratic nervousness. "The human delegation has arrived. Their leader wishes to inspect the gift arsenal personally." Vextal's mouthparts twisted in what might have been amusement. How delightfully thorough of them. "Very well, let's not keep our new friends waiting." The ceremony hall buzzed with the kind of forced politeness that characterized most interspecies diplomacy. Representatives from a dozen allied worlds had gathered to witness humanity's formal induction into the galactic community, each secretly relieved that they wouldn't be the newest, most backward members anymore. The humans had sent a modest delegation of 20 individuals, led by someone calling himself Captain Marcus Webb. Webb was exactly what Vextal had expected. Average height for his species, covered in the primitive fabric-based protection humans called clothing, and possessing the kind of earnest facial expression that suggested he took everything far too seriously. The perfect representative for a species that had somehow convinced itself it was ready for galactic citizenship. "Commander Vextal," Webb stepped forward with a crisp motion that the Empire's databases identified as a salute. "On behalf of humanity, I want to express our gratitude for this opportunity to join the galactic community." "The pleasure is entirely ours, Captain Webb," Vextal replied, his translator converting his harmonious tones into the crude barks and squeaks that constituted human language. "The Empire is always eager to guide developing species toward their full potential." The weapons presentation proceeded with all the pomp that 3 millennia of bureaucratic tradition could muster. Each item was announced with great ceremony, its historical significance carefully explained, and its basic operation demonstrated by junior officers who managed to look appropriately solemn despite handling what amounted to museum pieces. "The Mark 7 plasma rifle," Vextal announced as an aide hefted the weapon with theatrical reverence, "represents the pinnacle of energy weapon technology from our classical period. Note the elegant fusion chamber and the remarkably efficient containment field generator." Webb accepted the weapon with both hands, turning it over with the kind of careful attention that suggested genuine interest rather than polite obligation. "The power source? Miniaturized fusion cell, naturally, capable of approximately 3,000 shots before requiring replacement. We've included manufacturing specifications, of course." "Of course." Webb's expression remained neutral, but Vextal noticed the human's eyes had developed a particular gleam that the Empire's xenobiologists had classified as planning something. The ceremony continued with chemical explosives, guided missiles, and what the Empire generously termed tactical nuclear devices. Each gift was presented with the same elaborate courtesy, and each was received with the same intense scrutiny from the human delegation. By the end of the presentation, Vextall felt confident that humanity would spend the next several species had been during their own primitive periods. "We are truly honored by your generosity," Webb said, as the ceremony concluded. "These weapons will serve humanity well in our new role as galactic citizens." "I'm certain they will," Vextall replied, already composing his report on the successful integration of yet another backward species. "The Empire looks forward to a long and peaceful relationship with your people." What Vextall didn't know, as he watched the human delegation carefully catalogue and transport their new arsenal, was that humanity had spent the last 3 centuries perfecting the art of making warfare thoroughly unpleasant for everyone involved. The galaxy was about to receive a comprehensive education in applied human creativity. The first indication that something had gone wrong with humanity's integration came 6 months later, when the mining colony on Rigel 7 stopped responding to routine communications. The Zephyrian garrison there had been a token force, 50 soldiers equipped with standard suppression gear and the comfortable assumption that any primitive rebellion could be handled with minimal effort. General Kethmore, the Empire's leading expert on colonial pacification, reviewed the final transmission from Rigel 7 with growing bewilderment. The message was brief. "Unknown tactics, request immediate reinforcement. They're using our own weapons against us in ways that make no sense." "Clarify, ways that make no sense," Kethmore had transmitted back. The response had been even more puzzling. "They've turned the mining explosives into mobile artillery. They're hiding in the ventilation systems. They keep talking about something called asymmetric warfare. Sir, they're not fighting fair." The transmission had ended there, followed by 6 days of absolute silence. Kethmore dispatched a full battle squadron to restore order, confident that whatever primitive tactics the humans had devised would crumble against proper military doctrine. The squadron's commander, Colonel Thisful, was a veteran of 37 colonial suppression campaigns and had never encountered a rebellion that couldn't be resolved through the traditional combination of overwhelming firepower and civilized military strategy. The squadron arrived at Rigel 7 to find the mining colony apparently abandoned. Scans detected no significant military hardware, no defensive positions, and no indication of organized resistance. Thisful deployed his forces according to standard protocol: establish a perimeter, secure key installations, and wait for the rebels to surrender when faced with superior technology. The humans had been waiting in the abandoned mine shafts with a patience that bordered on supernatural. They struck at 300 local time, when Zephyrian circadian rhythms were at their lowest ebb, using weapons that shouldn't have existed and tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. The mining colony's fusion reactor, which had been offline for routine maintenance, suddenly roared back to life and promptly exploded. Not the clean, controlled explosion that might disable a facility, but a deliberately dirty detonation that scattered radioactive debris across the landing zone and made it impossible for the squadron's shuttles to evacuate wounded personnel. The humans had somehow converted the colony's atmospheric processes into crude but effective chemical weapons, filling the underground tunnels with clouds of corrosive gas that ate through standard Zephyrian protective gear. They had jury-rigged the mining equipment into mobile artillery platforms, turning industrial lasers into weapons capable of cutting through military-grade armor. Most disturbing of all, they had taken the Empire's gift weapons and modified them in ways that no civilized species would consider. The plasma rifles had been converted into area denial weapons that could turn entire corridors into killing zones. The guided missiles had been reprogrammed to act as intelligent mines, capable of lying dormant for days before activating in response to predetermined triggers. Colonel Thisful's final report, transmitted moments before his command post was overrun by humans who seemed to materialize out of solid rock, contained a single urgent recommendation: request immediate strategic review of human capabilities. Traditional suppression protocols are ineffective. They do not fight like any known species. The fall of Rigel 7 sent shockwaves through the Empire's military hierarchy. A fully equipped battle squadron had been defeated by a handful of human colonists using mining equipment and gift weapons that were supposedly 3 millennia out of date. The implications were uncomfortable enough that the High Command classified the entire incident and began quietly developing new protocols for dealing with what they euphemistically termed unconventional resistance. Lieutenant Colonel Diana Reeves had been having the time of her life. As humanity's chief tactical advisor for what the history books would probably call the Colonial independence movement, she had been given unprecedented freedom to explore the creative applications of Zephyrian military technology. The Empire's weapons were beautifully engineered, elegantly designed, and built with the kind of robust reliability that came from 3,000 years of continuous refinement. They were also completely predictable. Every weapon system came with comprehensive technical documentation that explained exactly how it was supposed to work, what safety protocols were built in, and what the manufacturer considered appropriate tactical employment. The Empire had been fighting the same way for so long that their equipment reflected a kind of fossilized tactical doctrine, optimized for the ritualized conflicts that characterized most galactic warfare. Human warfare, Reeves reflected as she supervised the conversion of another batch of plasma rifles into improvised area denial systems, had never been particularly ritualized. Humans had spent millennia finding creative ways to kill each other using whatever tools happened to be available, and the transition to galactic-grade hardware had been remarkably smooth. "Ma'am," Sergeant Collins approached with the kind of grin that usually preceded reports of successful mayhem. "The engineering team has finished the modifications to the fusion charges. We can now detonate them remotely on a timer or in response to specific trigger conditions." "Excellent. What about the guided missiles? Converted to autonomous hunter-killers, they'll patrol a designated area for up to 6 months, then activate when they detect Zephyrian military signatures. The onboard AI has been reprogrammed to prioritize command and control targets." Reeves nodded approvingly. The Empire's weapons were designed with enough built-in intelligence to be effective autonomous systems, but that same intelligence could be repurposed for tasks that their original designers had never considered. Turning guided missiles into patient-thinking minds was exactly the kind of creative application that made human warfare so effective. "Colonel," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving reports from the other cells. The Kepler 438 operation was a complete success. The Zephyrian garrison never figured out where the attacks were coming from. And Proxima 3? Textbook execution. They used the atmospheric processes to create a localized weather system, then attacked during the artificial storm. The Zephyrians couldn't use their energy weapons effectively in the electrical interference." Reeves allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Humanity had been fighting its colonial independence war for almost 2 years now, and every engagement had demonstrated the same fundamental truth. Advanced technology was only as effective as the tactical doctrine that employed it. The Empire's weapons were magnificent, but they had been designed for a style of warfare that emphasized honor, predictability, and mutual restraint. Human warfare emphasized winning. The breakthrough came when humanity captured an intact Zephyrian command post during the Battle of Ross 1028. The facility's tactical computers contained detailed analyses of human combat behavior, written by the Empire's leading xenostrategists, and classified at the highest levels of military security. The reports made for fascinating reading. According to Zephyrian military intelligence, humans exhibited pathological unpredictability in combat situations. They showed disturbing disregard for accepted tactical doctrine, an alarming willingness to employ asymmetric force multipliers. Most damning of all, they demonstrated systematic exploitation of equipment beyond manufacturer's specification. The Empire's analysts had identified humanity's fundamental strategic advantage with typical alien precision, but they had completely failed to understand its implications. Humans didn't fight unpredictably because they were primitive or undisciplined. They fought unpredictably because unpredictability worked. General Kethmore stared at the tactical display with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. The human rebellion had spread to 17 star systems, and every attempt to contain it had failed spectacularly. Standard suppression tactics were not only ineffective against human resistance cells, they seemed to make the situation worse by providing the rebels with additional equipment to modify and repurpose. "Sir," His aide approached with the careful hesitation of someone delivering bad news. "We've received word from the Vega system. The 15th Fleet has been neutralized." Clarify, neutralized. The humans converted the system's asteroid mining infrastructure into a mass driver array. They've been launching tungsten projectiles at near light speed for the past 3 days. The fleet was caught completely off guard. Kethmore's tentacles curled in a gesture that indicated profound displeasure. The 15th Fleet had been equipped with the Empire's most advanced defensive systems, capable of intercepting everything from guided missiles to particle beams. But the humans had simply thrown rocks at them. Very fast rocks, admittedly, but the principle was so primitive that no civilized species had considered it worth defending against. What about the 23rd Army? They were supposed to retake the manufactory complex on Wolf 359. The humans flooded the facility with industrial nanobots programmed to disassemble Zephyrian equipment at the molecular level. The 23rd Army has been forced to retreat to minimum safe distance, while their gear literally dissolves around them. The reports continued in the same vein. Humans had converted mining equipment into weapons, weapons into tools, and tools into completely new categories of military hardware that the Empire's tactical databases couldn't even classify. They fought from inside asteroids, from the upper atmospheres of gas giants, and from the quantum foam between dimensions using modified transportation devices. Most disturbing of all, they kept improving. Every engagement taught them something new about Zephyrian capabilities, and every captured piece of equipment ended up being reverse-engineered and deployed in ways that violated every principle of proper military engineering. "Sir," the aide continued with the tone of someone who knew the news was about to get worse, "intelligence has intercepted human communications referring to something called Phase 2. "Phase 2 of what?" "Unknown, sir, but they keep mentioning bringing the fight home and demonstrating proper gratitude." Kethmore had a sudden, terrible suspicion about what Phase 2 might involve. The humans had spent 2 years learning to use Zephyrian technology in ways that no civilized species would consider. Now they were talking about taking their newfound expertise somewhere else. Somewhere like the Zephyrian homeworld. The attack on Zephyr Prime came during the Empire's most sacred holiday, when the population traditionally gathered in massive ceremonial complexes to honor their ancestors and celebrate the achievements of galactic civilization. It was a time of peace, reflection, and communal harmony that had been observed without interruption for over 4,000 years. The humans arrived in converted cargo haulers that barely registered on the planetary defense network. The ships were too small to be considered a serious threat, too slow to be military vessels, and broadcasting identification codes that marked them as humanitarian relief supplies for the Rigel sector. By the time anyone realized that humanitarian relief ships typically didn't carry antimatter warheads, it was far too late to mount an effective defense. The orbital defense platforms were the first to go. The humans had studied Zephyrian defensive doctrine extensively and had identified a crucial weakness. The platforms were designed to engage threats that followed predictable attack patterns, missiles that approached from designated vectors, energy weapons that fired along expected trajectories, and landing craft that used standard insertion protocols. The humans simply ignored the established approaches and flew straight through the defensive grid while broadcasting surrender signals and humanitarian identification codes. The orbital platforms, programmed to avoid firing on non-combatant vessels, obligingly held their fire until the cargo haulers were close enough to deploy their real payload, modified mining charges that had been converted into electromagnetic pulse generators. The resulting pulse disabled every piece of electronic equipment within a 100-kilometer radius, including the orbital platforms, the planetary communication network, and most of the surface-based defense systems. Zephyr Prime was suddenly as defenseless as a pre-industrial world, and the humans had barely begun their demonstration. What followed was not an invasion in any sense that the Empire understood the term. The humans didn't attempt to occupy territory, establish bases, or engage in prolonged combat with defending forces. Instead, they conducted what their military manuals called a demonstration of capability. A carefully orchestrated display of exactly how much damage they could cause using the Empire's own weapons. the capital city's fusion reactor was converted into a localized weather control system, creating a brief but intense thunderstorm that knocked out power across the entire metropolitan area. The planetary transportation network found itself rerouted through a series of improvised quantum tunnels that deposited confused commuters on random moons throughout the system. The Empire's most prestigious military academy discovered that its entire curriculum database had been replaced with human tactical manuals and something called the Art of War. Most insulting of all, every major population center on Zephyr Prime received a simultaneous delivery of gift packages. Each package contained a selection of primitive human weapons, chemical firearms, explosive devices, and crude projectile launchers, along with a note that read, "Thank you for your generous donation to the human independence movement. Please accept these traditional Earth weapons as a token of our appreciation." The entire operation lasted exactly 6 hours. When it was over, the humans politely transmitted an open message to every communications array in the system. "We hope this demonstration has clarified our position regarding colonial independence. We look forward to productive negotiations regarding the establishment of formal diplomatic relations between our peoples." Then they left, disappearing into hyperspace as efficiently as they had arrived, leaving behind a planet-wide population that was beginning to understand exactly what they had unleashed when they decided to share their outdated weapons with humanity. Commander Vextal sat in his office, reviewing the preliminary damage reports from Zephyr Prime with the kind of stunned disbelief that came from watching one's fundamental assumptions about reality get systematically demolished. The humans had used Zephyrian technology to attack the Zephyrian homeworld with weapons that the Zephyrians had given them as gifts. The irony was so profound that it bordered on philosophical. "Sir," Lieutenant Kixnor approached, with a datapad containing the latest intelligence estimates. "The analysts have completed their assessment of human capabilities. The report is extensive." Vextal accepted the datapad and began scrolling through what appeared to be a comprehensive catalogue of human military innovations. Every weapon system that the Empire had gifted to humanity had been modified, repurposed, or completely reimagined in ways that their original designers had never considered. Plasma rifles had become mining tools. Mining tools had become weapons of mass destruction, and weapons of mass destruction had become art installations that happened to be capable of sterilizing entire star systems. What's their conclusion? The analysts recommend immediate cessation of hostilities and the opening of formal diplomatic channels. They believe that continued conflict would result in unprecedented tactical innovations from the human side. Vextal paused his reading to consider the implications. The Empire had given humanity outdated weapons as a gesture of condescending generosity, expecting them to spend centuries catching up to galactic standards. Instead, the humans had used those weapons to leapfrog past galactic standards entirely, developing tactical doctrines that made the Empire's military look positively primitive by comparison. "There's more, sir. The humans have transmitted a formal diplomatic proposal. They're offering to share their tactical innovations with other species in exchange for formal recognition of colonial independence." Share their innovation? "Yes, sir. Apparently several species have expressed interest in learning human warfare techniques. The Andromedans have already signed a military technology exchange agreement." Vextal set down the datapad and contemplated the galaxy's new strategic reality. Humanity had been integrated into galactic civilization as junior partners, expected to be grateful for whatever scraps of technology they were given. Instead, they had demonstrated that technological sophistication meant nothing without tactical flexibility, and that the Empire's generous gifts could be turned into weapons that made their original versions look like toys. The final report on his desk was a recommendation from the High Command: establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity, recognize their colonial independence, and begin negotiations for a mutual defense treaty. The Empire, which had spent 3 millennia as the galaxy's dominant military power, was asking a species of primitive mammals to teach them how to fight. The irony was not lost on him. The Zephyrian Empire had always prided itself on being magnificently generous to lesser species. Now, they were discovering that sometimes generosity came with unexpected costs. In the margins of the final report, someone had added a handwritten note, "Next time, maybe we should just give them flowers." Vextal found himself agreeing completely. The galaxy had learnt a valuable lesson about the dangers of underestimating species that still used fire to cook their food. Unfortunately, they had learned it the hard way, with their own weapons being used to teach it to them. The humans, for their part, seemed to find the entire situation hilarious. Their final diplomatic transmission had included what they called a thank you note for the Empire's generous contributions to human military development. It read, "We couldn't have done it without you. Literally, thanks for the weapons." Somewhere in the depths of space, Captain Marcus Webb was probably laughing at the galaxy's newest tactical doctrine, never give humans anything that can be weaponized, which, as the Empire was learning, included absolutely everything.